I'm really going to give the floor over to Michael, who's prepared a presentation.
Yeah.
And
Um,
Michael, I'll let you give the context on your background, what we're going to talk about
yeah.
today. And
Yeah, so I'm super excited to share this space with you all today. I've been looking forward to it for a few weeks, and I hope you all get as much out of this talk as I put into it. I want to give a shout out to Stu for setting me up to win, and I'm just so appreciative of you for your time and attention. So if we're meeting each other for the first time, here's a quick intro. I grew up in Dallas, where I studied journalism at a small college in a rural town of 10,000 folks. I entered the workforce during the Great Recession and didn't really think media was a viable industry for me. So I took a job at a financial startup as a corporate trainer, designing, developing, and delivering learning experiences for clients like Bank of America and Chase. Once the housing market recovered, the company went bankrupt and I was out of work. So I took a chance, relocated to New York to fulfill my dream of working in magazines. So I started as a fashion assistant at a now defunct magazine that Condé Nast used to publish called Lucky. And then I worked my way up to digital editor, where I produced shopping features, edited the home and tech markets, and wrote a weekly style column. I was also an e-commerce writer for a quick minute at Shop Bazaar, which is the online shopping companion to Harper's Bazaar magazine for any of my fashion folks out there. And I used to publish a cool fashion blog too called The Stylish Standout. Now I write The Super Creator, a publication about the future of creativity. And my reporting and storytelling exists really to empower creators to own their work, own their relationship with their supporters, and the economic value it generates. I'm also a proud alum of On Deck, the On Deck Writing Fellowship. And I started the Super Creator because so much of our media prioritizes the interests of consumers or business leaders. And I thought there was an opportunity to cover the intersection of work, power, and culture through a creative lens. I wanted to apply journalistic rigor and critical thinking to the most important and pressing issues affecting creative professionals. My hope was to help broaden our perspective, help make sense of the news, and surprise and challenge readers and myself every day. The bet I made was that by going beyond the hype, headlines, hot takes, and sound bites, I could provide the context required for you to own your genius and make living off of your creative work a viable and sustainable reality for more of us. Personally, I also want to try my hand at subscription media. I had been laid off 3 times in 1 year as a casualty of ad-supported big media, and was turned off by the participating in an ecosystem that subsisted on shocking, outrageous, and offensive content to attract attention on the internet. And in a few moments, I'll walk you through the workflow that enables me to write 4 newsletters per week featuring original essays and commentary on the news of the day and recommendations to the best writing and products from the web. But first, you may be curious if daily writing is for you. And I get asked that question a lot. And to be honest, that's a question you'll have to answer for yourself once you take inventory of things like your time and your resources, if you have any other existing commitments and professional goals that you may have. But what I can share is why I prefer the daily writing frequency over weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly cadences. First, daily writing accelerates my mastery of the skills that make me valuable to readers and subscribers. So the majority of my work time is spent thinking, reporting, and writing. And if I didn't have a daily mandate to practice these skills and show my work in public, then I'd probably waste my time with tasks like answering emails, scheduling calls, browsing Slack or Twitter, things that make me feel productive but are actually just distractions. And on the flip side, daily writing minimizes what I call little giants, which are the popular opinions or tightly held beliefs that we make bigger than what they really are, and disempower us from taking action towards our vision. For example, many creative professionals experience FOTU, also known as fear of the unknown, which is the sibling to FOMO, or fear of missing out. And according to R. Nicholas Carlton, a professor of psychology at the University of Regina in Canada, fear of the unknown is an individual's propensity to experience fear caused by the perceived absence of information at any level of consciousness or point of processing. So, in other words, we're afraid of people, places, things, thoughts, or ideas that feel incomplete or don't give us the full story. We like to know what we're getting ourselves into, what risks are involved, if the intentions of others are as pure as we perceive ours to be, or how we'll come out on the other side and how we'll look after we make a decision. Dr. Carlton says fear of the unknown is our fundamental fear, or as he wrote in a 2016 article published in the Journal of Anxiety Disorder, the quote, one fear to rule them all. And before I started writing my daily newsletter, I would feel paralyzed by thoughts of what people would think about my work that I hadn't even created or shared yet. But since I ship 4 days a week, I've given myself fewer opportunities to guess how people will respond to my work. And in the process, I've discovered that people are actually kinder than I give them credit for, and I'm more resilient than I give myself credit for. Lastly, daily writing increases the chances of my newsletter becoming appointment reading. And here's what I mean by that. The most valuable person to my business is someone who not only subscribes to and refers my newsletter, but also looks forward to reading it enough to prioritize it in their inbox and make time to read it. Case in point, a subscriber recently tweeted, "Michael from the Super Creator leads with depth in his reporting, which makes this one of my favorite newsletter subscriptions that I devour every evening." That's the comment I want everyone who subscribes to my work to have. Not only do you like subscribing to it, but you actually look forward to it. And since you're only as good as your last newsletter, and daily writing gives me more chances to create and ship my work, my best work, I find that the daily cadence works well for me. Now I'm going to do something that flies against conventional wisdom. A lot of people will tell you that you should save your best stuff for last so you all will remain engaged through the entire talk, but I'm going to give you the cheat code to daily writing up front now before I go into the workflow. So you guys ready for it? Cool. Okay, if you take away only one thing from this talk, here it is. Give everything you write a deadline before you start writing. In our business, it doesn't exist if it doesn't have a deadline. No creative project can thrive if the creator is unaccountable. Deadlines make you responsible to your readers and keep your perfectionism at bay. And if you struggle with personal integrity, enlist a writing partner that you respect to keep you on deadline. Nothing I share with you the rest of the talk will matter if you're unwilling to set and respect deadlines, even if they're self-imposed. And here's a bonus tip. If you struggle with keeping deadlines, then ask people to pay for your work. When people are giving you money for a product, service, or experience, there are significant consequences when you drop the ball. And I found that for me, it's a huge motivator when I know that people are actually paying for me to show up every day. Okay, so enough about why I write a daily newsletter. Let's actually dive into the workflow that enables me to ship my writing with confidence, clarity, and consistency. So I'll be sure to leave time for Q&A at the end, and I've also created a document that I'll share at the end of the talk with a link to these slides and an overview of my presentation, plus a list of all the apps I use in this workflow and details on how to stay in touch if you're interested. So my daily writing is organized into 3 phases: writing and post-writing. And within each phase are a series of repeatable steps that depend on the one that precedes it. So the pre-writing phase includes 3 steps: sweeping the news cycle, brainstorming my featured essay, and reporting the featured essay. So I'll begin my morning with a deep sweep of hundreds of sources in my RSS reader to get a sense of the news of the day, collect links for the more service-driven sections of my newsletter, and bookmark sources to jumpstart the reporting for my featured essay. I bookmark news even if I don't intend to immediately cover it. What I found is that if something is interesting to me now, chances are it'll be useful to me later. Now, news can develop from anywhere: websites, books, academic research, reader tips, personal experience, a current conversation, or even the cultural zeitgeist. So in addition to my RSS reader, I'll also check Twitter for breaking news or DMs from tips or notes. A lot of people will give me tips or notes or say, hey, this may be a story that will be great for the super creator. I'll glance at my email inbox in case there's anything interesting there. I'll also look at news aggregators like TechMeme, Media Gazer, Memorandum to see what industry news is bubbling up, since they're the sites of record for several of the topics that I cover. Now, at the Super Creator, I define newsworthiness as stories and events from the past 24 to 72 hours that are interesting to a majority of creative professionals, relevant to my expertise, and able to be sourced. And as a best practice, I focus my attention on big stories that I can interpret through a creative lens, or small niche stories with untapped mainstream appeal. And as I'm looking at the news every day, I'm running it through that filter. What is this newsworthy? Is this something that's happened recently? Do I have any expertise on it? Can I source this story? These are the kind of the mental checklists that I go through every day as I'm looking at what news I want to track. And the bulk of my creative energy is dedicated to writing the featured essay that opens each newsletter. Now, it's usually 1,200 to 1,600 words, and it covers the intersection of media, power, and culture. And the goal of my essays are to empower readers and subscribers to take a moment, step back, slow down, and think about the forces that enable them to or inhibit them from living off their creative work. And generally speaking, readers subscribe to the super creator because they value depth and they value context and they want a connection and access to insights they can't get anywhere else. So instead of just regurgitating the news, I like to brainstorm a big idea, which is nothing more than a simple statement that explains the thesis of the story and states what point the article will prove and the dots I'm trying to connect once I start writing. Now, my intention is to always feature as much original reporting from public or private sources as possible. And what I mean by that are quotes, data, confirmation of facts and figures, archival links, documents. And I define a source as a person, publication, or other record or document that provides timely information. Now, when it's appropriate, I try to make a judicious attempt to mix establishment sources like mainstream sources with outside kind of official culture. And what I find is that it's often the people who are overlooked who have the best information to give you. As well, it's tempting to look at people who are in the mainstream or look at people who have the most followers on Twitter or look at people who, have the contributor title on CNN or MSNBC or whatever the case may be. I found that it's what we consider normal people or outsiders who often have opinions that are fresh and can give you tips that can make your writing go to the next level. And if my essay requires access from an expert, creator, or company to prove my thesis, then I'll secure access before moving forward. And in the journalism business, this is called pre-reporting. And that's really important too, because sometimes I'll want to write about something. And if I don't have access to an expert, then it really doesn't matter because I won't have access to the sources that I need to make the case that I'm trying to make. And if I'm unable to come up with that big idea that I talked about, then it's probably a sign that I'll be incapable of meaningfully advancing the story and should probably choose another topic instead of being right about the news that I want to report. I find a lot of times that people just add noise to the conversation. There's already so much being written about some of the things that we like to write about that if I can't add something new to the conversation, then I won't even take time to report it. I also like to get my hands on as much previous reporting about the topic as possible. So I'll take a few minutes to do a Google search of keywords, phrases, and topics that are relevant to the news I'm covering. And I'll usually report my essay for an hour or two until I feel I've gotten enough information to tell a complete story. Now, a lot of people ask, how do you know you've done enough reporting? How do you know you've done enough research? And there's really no science to it. I trust my instincts. And one of the barometers that I use is if I've learned at least one new thing that surprised or struck me in some way, then that means I probably dug deep enough in my reporting. If I find a lot of the things that I already know or use a lot of the sources that I've used in other stories, it probably means that I haven't gone deep enough with my reporting. I practice what I call the no surprises rule in my newsletter. And whenever I critique someone or something, I'll offer the source the opportunity to answer kind of allegations or criticism before publishing my work. And so when it comes to picking up news from other sources, I also like to confirm things. I also like to reach out to people and ask, hey, Facebook, is this true that you guys are working on this product feature? Or, hey, Spotify, this was reported. Can you give me a confirmation on this? And my policy is to quote sources by name unless they ask and I agree not to publish it to preserve their employment or their business relationships. One thing that I also like to let guys know is that you don't have to agree to say certain things or give people that you report on the ability to preview or approve interview questions. And you don't have to let people review your stories prior to publication. A lot of times these savvy PR people will say, hey, I'll give you this, I'll give you that. Can I see a link to your story before it goes live? And you are under no obligation to do that. And what it does is, by protecting your editorial independence, it builds trust with your subscribers that your coverage is unbought and unbossed and that they can really trust what you have to say. Now, it may require some effort to find a press contact, but the willingness to report your stories and not just spitball opinions is what's going to separate your writing from so many other newsletters. And a few places that I like to look if I can't find like a press contact, or if I'm looking for like a source that kind of represents a company or a mainstream publication, I like to check the press room on their website. Usually, if you go down to the footer of a website, you can find a press contact that way. You can look at company about pages or their contact pages. You can also look at Twitter too. Twitter is an excellent source for finding people if you're looking for sources. And if you have any previous sources, if anybody in your writing community has helped you with a story in the past and you're writing about something similar, it's often helpful to reach out to them and say, hey, Stu, I'm working on a story about blah, blah, blah. I remember when you helped me last time. Do you have anybody that will be helpful for this? So mine the community that you already have to get new sources. Now, for phase 2, I'm going to give you my number 1 rule for writing, and it's to write how you speak. So here's what I like to do. I like to think of my best friend or my sister, or maybe you can think of your significant other, and I write to them. And so your work should feel voicey, and it should sound like it came from a human with points of view, experience, and culture. And for the super creator, the way that I like to describe that voice is bright but not naive, brainy but not bossy, and bloggy but not sloppy. And so it's nice if you have an idea of what do you want your writing to sound like, because you're going to be writing in this voice every day. And when in doubt, opt for clear over clever. And if you use humor in your writing, be inclusive. Make sure to bring readers in on the joke. So if you use a meme that's kind of bubbling under the radar, maybe link to a definition of the Urban Dictionary or something like that. You want to make people feel like they're in on the joke if you use humor in your writing. And if you have a choice between cracking a joke or being punny or being clever, and it compromises the clarity of your writing, you may want to opt for clarity over being clever. And in the words of marketer Ann Handley, assume the reader knows nothing, but don't assume the reader's stupid. And so a lot of times when you're writing a daily newsletter, I've often, felt, oh, they read this every day. They're familiar with concepts that I wrote about last year because they've been a subscriber forever. But I really try to make sure that I respect the fact that my readers are busy and that they're not going to remember everything, but I also try not to talk down to them either. It's also important to explain to readers about whom or what you're writing, even if you think something that you're writing about is something everyone should know. It can feel disempowering to people to see things written about and not understand the backstory that led to it being featured in your work. And as you're writing, think about context as a service to your readers and try to make sure that you're putting everything into a context that they can understand. And finally, here's something that as a recovering perfectionist, I have to remind myself of almost daily. So here's the thing, I write a daily newsletter and my deadline is here before I know it. And so that usually means that my posts will almost always be imperfect. I'll occasionally mess up. I'll always wish I had more time. I may have to issue corrections or clarifications in subsequent posts, but that's really the trade-off that the super creator makes to turn around timely reporting and criticism 4 days a week. And so my advice, if you're someone who is thinking about writing more, be graceful with yourself and your work, and avoid the perception that every post has to be a home run. There's the new post for me tomorrow. There's no need for me to be precious about today's. And so to that end, it's unrealistic for every word or every sentence to be exquisite. So I focus my attention on writing 3 powerful paragraphs. One is called the hook, another one is called the billboard, and the last one is called the kicker. Now, a hook, you've probably heard this before, but a hook is just a personal story or a historical anecdote, maybe a question you want to ask to a reader, or a shocking statement, or anything that attracts attention and sets up what's about to come into the article. And when you think about hooks and what makes an effective hook, I like to think of it this way: is hooks, they appeal to your reader's pain or possible pleasure. A lot of great hooks tease what readers will learn in the article, and they often describe the origin or background of the topic. So if you're talking about a topic that the origin or the backstory really isn't clear to your readers, a great way to hook readers is to give them the origin or backstory before you go into the depth of reporting the topic. Now, hooks aren't as intimidating as they feel. I get a lot of feedback from writers who say, I struggle from blank screen syndrome. I can't get any words on the page, and it just makes me not want to keep going. And really, all you need to do for a great hook is to tell an engaging story or anecdote or introduce a compelling fact. As I'm doing my reporting and pulling together my research and my data and my quotes, I'm often looking for things that will make a great hook as I'm reporting it. So if I see a fact I'm like, oh, this will be great for my hook. Or if there's a quote, oh, this will be great. So as I'm reporting the story, I'm often thinking about not only am I going to use this in my piece, but where would it go in the piece? And so I found that's really a useful strategy for me. And if none of this works, one technique that I like to use is what's called the cinematic technique. And it's really just telling your story as if you're describing a scene in a movie. And we all love to feel like we're living in a writer's world. And so that's a great way to hook people, is to put them in your world and tell your story from the point of view of a movie director. Get your Quentin Tarantino, so to speak. Now, at its core, a hook is what makes readers sit up and take notice. And so it may not be longer than a fantastic tweet. There are a lot of questions around how long should my hook be? And there's really not a specific formula to figuring it out. But I do have 3 questions that could help you determine what your hook should be if you're struggling. And one is, as I already mentioned, what's the most interesting story or claim from my reporting? Another question to ask is, what sentence or fact makes people sit up and take notice? And 3, what's the intended audience going to care about the most or be interested in or shocked by? And the thing about shocking people with your hook is the difference between a shocking hook and clickbait is that everything in the rest of the essay is going to support whatever shocking claim that you may have, versus clickbait is just to get you into the story. And so there are a lot of people who are leery of using shock or curiosity in their hook. And like I said, it's not that you're using like a shocking statement or fact inside your tweet to get people to click through. You're actually using emotion to set up the rest of your story, if that makes sense. Now, after the hook comes the billboard. And this is the paragraph that introduces the big idea or thesis and gives the reader context of why they should pay attention to the article. Now, in journalism, we call billboards the nut graph, but I prefer billboard versus nut graph. And so if you ever hear nut graph, that's really, that's journalism lingo, journalism parlance, but I call this paragraph the billboard. And here's a screenshot from a billboard I wrote last month about, I don't know if you guys heard about her, but this woman named Soho Karen, who allegedly assaulted a 14-year-old Black boy after falsely accusing him of stealing her phone in a hotel in New York City last December. And so here's a billboard that I wrote, and the thesis of the essay was that the Soho Karen, she performed what's often known as like white victimhood, a teenager, to try to get the police and the hotel staff to interrogate someone who she thought had committed a crime but hadn't committed a crime. And when that didn't work, she tried to then turn around and say, I'm a woman of color, so there's no way that I could be racist because, look, I'm Greek and I'm Puerto Rican, and I think she's also has Italian heritage too. And so by her exploiting her identity as a woman of color, she was minimizing her behavior when she and she literally assaulted the boy. Like, she grabbed him and threw him to the ground. And so this particular billboard paragraph encapsulates that thesis. And so I just wanted to show an example of what a billboard looks like. And so I'll give you guys a couple of seconds to look at that, and then I'll go to the next slide. And I'll also grab the link to this article too, if you guys want to read the entire story. So I'm going to keep it moving and talk about kickers now. So the kicker is the last paragraph or 2 of an essay, and kickers are designed to tie everything together, neatly summarize your essay, and in some instances provide a call to action for the reader. Kickers are also great at addressing kind of any lingering issues or closing any open loops. If there's anything that you've written about in the essay that kind of will have, that kind of feels unresolved or like a loose end that will leave your reader wondering, I wonder what he meant by that. I wonder what she meant by that. They didn't really come to a resolution on that. Your kicker or your last couple of paragraphs, your conclusion is a great way to tie everything up. Your readers, when they finish your work, should feel like everything was wrapped up in a bow. Now, the thing about kickers is they shouldn't introduce any new ideas. They should really just summarize what's already in the essay. Your kicker can have new stories and anecdotes, though. And here's another example from a newsletter I wrote about comments from Whole Foods CEO John Mackey about healthcare. He basically said that if people ate better and exercised more, then they wouldn't need healthcare. And so the piece that I wrote, I think the headline was "The CEOs Won't Save Us." And it was really just about the trouble we find ourselves in when, by virtue of how much wealth you have, dictates how much power you have when it comes to policy like healthcare. And there are a lot of people who should have healthcare independent of whether or not they exercise or eat according to the diet that I think Americans should be eating. So that's really the thesis of the essay. And here's the kicker that I wrote for that particular essay. And that's really a great way to come up with your thesis, is to go back and look at your big idea. Did I really prove what I said that I was trying to prove? And what's a way that I can leave a lasting impression? So if your hook is designed to get people in the door and your billboard is designed to set the table for the argument that you're making, your kicker is the parting gift that you give people at a nice dinner when they leave your dinner party. That's a way to think of it. Now, after I write my hook, billboard, and kicker, now those are just 3 paragraphs of the essay, but those are, to me, the anchors of every essay that I write. So that's really what I spend most of my time working on, is if I can write a good hook, if I can write a good billboard, and if I can write a good kicker, then I've got a pretty solid essay. And once I get those 3 paragraphs written, what I'll go back and I'll go in between and I'll list a series of topic sentences that kind of support what I'm saying. And so I look at what I wrote in those 3 paragraphs and say, okay, what else can I say that will support what I'm saying? Are there any counter arguments that I can include? Are there any explanations that need to be made to help support what I'm saying? And I like to paste the relevant reporting and sources under each sentence as bullets. So what I'll do is, if I have, a great quote from Stu, then I'll put a bullet under the topic sentence that it works for. And I'll just put like the quote from Stu, or I'll put a link to the article. So I know when I go to write that paragraph, all my sources are already together. So that's how I organize the rest of my essay. And if there are any notes or reminders, I'll put them in parentheses. And then I'll just start filling out paragraphs. And I try to make sure that there's a ordered and logical flow, that everything transitions well. And the thing I like to note is that if I've done my work with my reporting and my anchor paragraphs are strong, then the rest of the writing should be smooth sailing. And so I spend a lot of time in the morning when I'm doing my reporting to make sure that I've got good supporting content, good supporting stuff, good research. And like I said, I try to make sure that those 3 paragraphs are good. And then the rest of the paragraphs take care of themselves. Now we're on the home stretch. So once I have a draft that I'm comfortable with, then we move to post-writing. And this pretty much is my favorite part of the day, because that means that pretty much all the heavy lifting is done. So first, when I get to the post-writing phase, I'll focus on crafting a headline and a deck, which will serve as the subject line and preview text that subscribers see in their inbox, and the title and subtitle visitors see on my website. So headlines are where readers start, and they should be accurate in fact and implication. They should speak the language of the internet and be easily understood. Your headline should attract attention because you're, going to be promoting it on, crowded Twitter timelines and crowded, time boxes. So it's great to use interesting active words, and your headline should set or match the tone of the article. I wrote a story about Jeff Bezos retiring yesterday, and I think the first 2 words were I think it was "oh fun, Jeff Bezos is now going to use his free time on." It was basically about my critique of big philanthropy and billionaires using their money to fix the world. And so I wanted to set the tone that it was a little tongue in cheek. So I used like the words "oh fun." And so often your headline is a great way to set the tone of the essay that you're asking people to read, or match the tone. So that's one of the things that I think about as I'm writing headlines. And as a best practice, You want to make sure that the people, groups, companies, and products that you're writing about are mentioned in a fairly straightforward manner. You really want to make it easy for people to know what they're getting themselves into. And unless you're breaking news, chances are high that the reader is already familiar with what you're writing about. So instead of just restating what happened in your headline, one of the things that I really recommend is to play up the unique angle of your article. If you've got a unique take that you haven't seen anywhere else on the internet, put that in the headline up front. Don't bury it at the bottom of the article and hope that people will get to it. Let people know up front, hey, everybody's talking about this, but they're not talking about it in this way. And so this is why you should read this piece. And headlines should be Google friendly too. Someone saw the headline in Google or Google News. Would they know enough about the topic to click through? And if the answer is no, then it's probably a good idea to keep workshopping the headline. Now, deks are, and again, this is another piece of journalism jargon, but deks are just the 1 to 2 line summaries that come after the headline and the next place to make a favorable impression on readers. And your deck should be crafted to provide just enough detail and information to get readers to move on to reading the article itself. One of the things that I like to do with the deck is to tease, flirt, or hint at my big idea without giving it away. It's important that your reader knows what kind of story that they're getting themselves into. So I write a lot of narrative first-person essays. Let's say I was doing an interview with Stu. If I didn't put Q&A in the headline, I would probably put in my deck, hey, in this exclusive Q&A with Stu from Compound Writing, yada, because that kind of gives readers a heads up that, oh, this isn't like all of the other stories that I'm used to reading. So your deck is a great place for that. Another thing that's great for decks to think about is to match the headline's tone and incorporate SEO without being a hostage to it. So I'm not someone who spends a lot of time trying to optimize everything for search, but it is something that I think about. And my headline and deck are great ways for me to make sure that I'm giving my stories a chance to be found by people searching for them. And then I'll research images for the newsletter. And I think of images as the next entry point after my headline and my deck to let readers into the story and also enhance my text. I like to err on the side of bigness. Itty bitty, pictures that are, small and grainy, they're a blemish on the entire article. And you could have a really perfect article and have a crappy picture, and it just really ruins the entire reading experience. So I really try to make sure that I'm not like randomly cropping images, using too small photos. I really try to make sure that the images that I use are of high quality, like the copy that I try to write. So we're in the home stretch now. And at this point, I'm formatting my newsletter. I'm designating if this is going to go to paid subscribers or to my entire list. I'm updating the URL. I'll send myself a test email, and then I'll schedule it for delivery. My newsletter goes out at 5 p.m. every day. And I like to screenshot the billboard. Usually when I promote the story on Twitter, instead of using the featured image from the newsletter, I often put the billboard, often because some of my posts are behind a paywall and they require a subscription. And I find putting my billboard as the Twitter image, gives people who aren't subscribers a chance to hear my point of view, even if they don't have access to the whole article. And it's also a great way to tease what you get when you subscribe. And so instead of using a picture or kind of like a 1-sentence teaser, I like to screenshot my entire billboard to promote the story once it's live. And if I'm not too tired after all of this, I'll do a mini sweep of the news cycle. And that kind of gets me a head start thinking about, okay, what are the stories that are going to be trending for tomorrow? And once I'm done working, I like to have a shutdown ritual. So sometimes I'll FaceTime my mom. I'll catch up on all the texts that I missed while I was working. I'll watch a cooking show or something from my Hulu queue and just shut it down for the day so I can start fresh again tomorrow. And I really want to put an emphasis on if you're writing with any type of intense frequency, whether it's daily, 3 times a week, whatever the case may be, it's really important for your brain to know when you're off work and when you're on work. Because if not, then everything just looks the same and you just get burned out. And so it's really important. Once I'm done with this, I'm done for the day. And so I'm actually going to shut down. I'm actually going to give myself some time to unplug from Twitter, unplug from the news cycle, and do things that really fill me up because I spend so much time thinking about kind of what's going on in the world and how to interpret it and write about it. So I just hit you with some intense knowledge. So I think it's the perfect time to open up for Q&A. My intention is to answer as many questions as time allows. And like I said, if you have any follow-ups or you want to stay in touch, Here's my information. It's in the doc that I have for you guys. Once again, so grateful for your time and attention. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And who has the first question?
Awesome. Yeah, I'd encourage anybody's welcome to unmute and take the floor. I have a few to kick us off here, but that was awesome. The chat, I don't think I've ever seen the chat light up like this during the presentation. So I think you had everyone's full attention. Yeah, who wants to kick off with the question? Otherwise, I'm going to take the first slot. Yeah, Yina, please.
Yeah, so thanks so much, Michael. This was amazing information, and then also your frequency, your system, and also just your writing was really inspiring. I think my question is, when it comes to writing at such an intense frequency and having, like, you've set a very accountable deadline that other people are holding you accountable to. How do you have an off day? Like how do you manage an off day?
Yeah.
Like maybe something happened and then you can't find the time or the energy or the brain space. How do you prepare for that?
Yeah, excellent question. Excellent question. A couple of things. I'll share a quick story. So last year during the racial reckoning, like during all the protests and everything, obviously that was really difficult for me, like from a personal standpoint, not just from a professional standpoint. And I think one day I wrote a post, and I think the headline was, "I just don't have it in me today." And so I was just honest. I said, hey, I know that I usually show up every day, but today I didn't know that I wouldn't be. When I woke up this morning, I didn't anticipate not being able to write today. And so this is an outlier, but I hope you guys give me grace today. And if you don't, I understand because you're paying for something, but this is what's up. So that's one situation where if it's like unexpected, I'm just honest and I say, hey, this is what's going on. And the thing about that is I call it trust equity. I've built up enough trust equity with my subscribers that if something, they know that this isn't a trend. They know, oh, if Michael isn't right, this is something must be up because Michael always shows up. And so it's really important for me to always show up when I can, because all that does is every day I build more trust equity. So when something does happen, I can be upfront and be honest, and I don't have to be gross about it and lie and just do all sorts of scammy stuff. So that's one instance. The other thing that I do is I have my publication schedule is publicly available. And so when people subscribe, I actually link them to my publication schedule that has a list of all the federal holidays that I observe. And it also tells people that I give myself 6 weeks of vacation. Like I give myself 6 weeks of vacation and I give myself sick days. And so at any moment that I'm sick, it's built into the subscription that like you should expect me to take the last 2 weeks of the year off. I typically take a spring break in March. I'm probably going to take a summer break. So that's built into the experience. And I think what's really important is to set expectations before your readers set them, and B, run your writing practice like an actual business if you want to make a career out of it. If you treat it as just, oh, I'm a writer, then people sometimes have a hard time remembering that, oh, this is actual, like there's a business behind this too, or there's an actual, like, these people aren't just robots that churn out copy. We're actually people who want to take a day off and who want to have weekends to themselves. And so I really set the expectation that I'm going to show up 4 days a week. I'm going to reply to your emails. I'm going to be available to you. And when I'm not available, I'm not available. And so by setting that expectation and really I built time off into the subscription. So like when you subscribe, you're not paying for me to be on 365 days a year. You're paying for a specific product, and here's when I'm going to give it to you. So those are the 2 ways that I manage emergency days where I'm not feeling it, and then just in general, how I run my business is I build all of that into the actual subscription itself. So I hope that helps.
Oh yeah, that's brilliant. I was trying to figure out how you could go about this. So I think the main thing for me was the trust equity is so important just in anything we do. So I really appreciate the emphasis on that. And then also the strategy of setting the expectations. Like I don't think that is prioritized enough. So I'm definitely going to look into how to do that. Thank you.
Cool.
All right, who's next? You're welcome to unmute and take the floor. Otherwise, I've got some I'm going to fire off here. So one I had, Michael, is I was really intrigued by your filter for newsworthiness. And I think somebody put it in the chat. It's really cool that you have a criteria of what you deem newsworthy. But I'm curious to hear you elaborate a little bit more on that and like basically how you pick ideas that you think are actually going to be winners and you're going to have the energy to write about.
Yeah. So one of the things when I started the Super Creator that I thought was really important is for me to have a point of view. I thought it was really important for me to sit down and think, Michael, how do you see the world? Like, what matters to you? And I'm not someone, I exist in the world as like a Black gay man. And so I'm not someone who, I went to journalism school and you're taught in journalism school, like to be objective and that if you have an opinion, it should be in the op-ed section and not in the news. And so I was raised as a journalism kid with very rigid ideas of what it meant to be a journalist or a reporter or a columnist or a writer. And when I started the Super Creator, since it was just me, I was like, okay, you have an opportunity to really filter the world like through your lens. And so I sat down and I thought about what does that mean? And so I sat down and I wrote like my personal values and I wrote, what would a perfect world look like? That's really an exercise that I did early on is if your reporting, if your journalism, if your writing made an impact, what would the world look like? And once I did that exercise, I put like a line down the middle of the page, and then I wrote, why aren't we there yet? What's inhibiting us from living in this vision that you have? And then I look for news that I can like use to amplify, hey, I think the world should look like this. And because this news story happened, we're not there yet. And I feel like we need to be paying attention to it. Another thing that I like to do is if there are things that like are affirming the world as I want to see it, I write about that too. And so it's really, for me, a lot of it is really does this news enable you to write the story you'd want to read? That's really, if I had to boil it down to Michael, outside of that criteria in your presentation, like what does it really boil down to? Like, Stu, if I don't want to read it, like I'm not gonna write it. So if I don't like the news itself, if I read the story and I'm just like, this, I know that I'm not gonna. And so some of it starts with an instinctual gut feeling. Oh, this is like I wrote about Clubhouse the other week when they raised their latest round and they were valued at $1 billion. And I hadn't wrote about Clubhouse before, but immediately I was like, this is a super creator. Like immediately when I read it, I was like, this is a super creator story. And so I sat down and spent the entire weekend working through, and it ended up being the most read piece in the newsletter's short history. But it literally came from an instinct of, you know what, Michael, you have something to say about this. And then two, it also allows you to share your worldview and help people understand why are you writing about this stuff. And so there really isn't, and to be honest, if you ask another editor at a magazine or you ask another writer, they're gonna have their own criteria. And so it's really whatever it is that helps you. And the thing about it is when I'm looking at news throughout the day, it's a quick process. Like I'm not spending a lot of, if there's really not a quick reaction to it, I move on because I don't have time to ask myself, do you have a feeling about this? Do you? Last thing I'll share is one of the things that helps me pick newsworthy stories for my newsletter is to have kind of awareness of the bigger world. So I don't cover climate change, but I'm aware of the climate crisis. And I took a look at Biden's climate policy when he was campaigning. And again, these aren't things that I write about, but I try to have a global sense of what matters in the world. And if that intersects with something that I want to talk about, then I know that's going to be something that people may be interested in. Is that helpful?
That's amazing. I love that exercise you did
Yeah.
of what world do I want to live in?
Yeah.
Start writing about the stuff that's stopping us from getting there and write about some of the stuff that's helping us get there.
Yeah.
Love that filter. Ryan, I saw your video go on. So yeah, please unmute and the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. This was really insightful. And actually what you just said about climate relates to what I have a question for. So I write about ancient healing methods for trauma recovery. And through this process, I want to talk about like racism and bigger like structural issues. And I'm white and I have white male readers. I don't know their politics. And so I want to stay issue focused and not talk about things that could be alienating, however, make it relatable. Do you have any thoughts about just with my own identity? Because I also don't want to, I want to help people. So I don't want to have someone unsubscribe because maybe in 6 months I could reach them. And I'm trying to figure out like the push and pull with like more of a worldview to what I do, and not just like my narrow view about trauma recovery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to be honest, I don't think about, people unsubscribing and what if they don't. I feel like everything I write is valuable. And I also know that one of the things that's really appealing about the subscription model to me is that inherently by having a subscription business model, I like shut my business off to a lot. Like out of the 4 pieces that I write every week, 3 of them are paid, 1 of them is free. And so the majority of my work is siloed off from people who don't pay $5 a month or $50 a year. And so for a lot of people, when we discuss like the ethics of media and if that's a good, I'm not here to debate whether it's good or bad for journalism or for writing. The point that I'm making is I chose that business model because inherently that attracts people who want to hear what I have to say. If you know that, okay, Michael writes 4 things a week, 3 of them require either $5 a month or $50 a year, that inherently attracts a certain kind of subscriber. And so my business model actually does a lot of the work for me, where I'm not having to like think about, if you're going to pay to like rage against what I have to say, I'll take your money and let you be mad. Like, I don't mind. And so that's why I really don't think about what if I piss someone off, or what if people unsubscribe, or what if I get it wrong. The other thing that I'll add about identity is I write about race a lot, not because there's this, it makes no sense, but a lot of people have this axiom about, oh, you're playing the race card. And so there's that critique a lot when I write about race. I'm not writing about race. I'm writing from the lived experience of someone who like lives in my body and who's experienced racism. And I can tell you like it was yesterday, the first time I was arrested for no reason. Like, this isn't something that like I heard about or something that I needed. I remember being 15 years old at a carnival and being arrested for no other reason other than I looked like to the officer that I was there to cause trouble. So when I write about race, it's not some ambiguous, oh, kumbaya, let's all like be friends. It's actually, this is the cost of racism on a 15-year-old boy who saw the world as equal and saw the world as like anything was possible. And in that moment, everything changed for me. So I'm not saying to you, Ryan, as a white man. What I'm saying is to be honest in your writing and talk about the things that make you uncomfortable in a way that like helps other people be like comfortable being uncomfortable. And you actually have an opportunity as a white writer with white readers to actually take some of the burden off of me of like having to be like the spokesperson for all things racism, and use your interests to talk about the things that like you may not have expertise and may not be comfortable with. And the last thing that I'll share is that's where doing a lot of research comes in. The things that I don't know about, I just look up. And if there's a writer who talks about race better than I do, then I send them an email and I say, hey, Ryan, I just read your book on why racism is stupid. And you know what? I'm not very familiar with these topics, but I think it's important for my readers to know about it. Would you be interested in answering 3 questions about it? And I promise you, if you find, one of the things about sources, I'll give you a little pro tip, find people who have an incentive to talk. And what I mean by that is book authors always have a reason to talk. Like they want to promote their book. People who do, if you find people and you say, does it benefit them to talk to me? Reach out to them, because you're gonna get people who have an incentive to talk to you because they want their work amplified. So don't try to be everything to everyone. Write from your point of view what you want to see, write what you want to read, and then trust that there are enough writers for the subscribers who unsubscribe and go somewhere else. I would rather you unsubscribe and go be served by someone who's for you than for you to be angry and subscribe to me.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you. Yeah, I want to talk about like my role in white supremacy and like how it has to start with me. And so now I'm thinking like I can do it through the lens of healing and ancient and trauma and recovery, because it's not just, if I recover that honesty, then I can model that potentially for other people.
Exactly. And that's what you want for your readers. You want them to be inspired. Now, I don't want my readers to be me or to want to be me, but I do want them to say, you know what, I see Michael's doing the work. I see Michael's challenging himself. I see Michael's going deep on issues that he may not be familiar with. And I want to do the same. So that's really kind of what you want. So hope that's helpful.
Amazing advice. And we've got time for maybe one more.
Cool.
If anyone wants to take it. Like I said, I've got my laundry list here. Anyone's welcome to unmute and take the seat. Otherwise, I have to ask, because I'm just amazed at your output and ability to just ship. And I love some of the comments you made about getting over our inner perfectionist and many of the other friction points I think a lot of us probably feel. How much time do you spend from, I know you talked a lot about pre-writing, but from the time you're actually like opening up Google Docs or Substack or whatever and typing the first words, how much time are you typically spending on a draft that's going to go out that day?
So I try to give myself 2 hours to write the actual. So I usually start head down reporting my piece around 10. So I spend about from 10 to 12. I spend reporting, not only reporting my essay, but there are 5 parts to the newsletter. So there's the essay that I spend a lot of time talking about. There's also a couple of news sections that kind of fill readers in on news they may have missed. I'm gonna do a product recommendation every day called Michael's Pick. And then I do a big section called Read All About It, where I pick 6 stories from around the internet that to me represent like the best writing of the day that I think my reader, like if you read these 6 things, you would be like up on what's going on in our culture. That's the point of Read All About It, is that if you don't read anything but my essay and I even put the excerpt from the piece that I think is most like impactful. So even if you don't read the entire article. So anyway, I do all of that in the morning. So as I'm reporting my piece, as I'm collecting sources for my essay, I'm also collecting sources, like I'm collecting links. So it's like double duty from 10 to 12. I'm thinking about my essay and I'm also putting together the rest of the newsletter. So by 12, I'm in good shape if everything but my essay is done. So by noon, I want to have all my reporting done for my essay. So if I'm interviewing someone, like everything's out. Like all my interview requests are out. I've got all my links. I've got everything that I need. And I usually try to start thinking about my big idea too. So I try to have a big idea by noon too. And then I take a 2-hour break. So from 12 to 2, it's on my calendar as free time. And that's just whatever I feel like doing. I don't like to think about the news too much. And so 2 hours of news is enough for me. And then I try to step away. So I go away. Sometimes I take a nap, sometimes I meditate, sometimes I cook myself a lunch. It's free time, however I want to spend it. And then from 2 to 4, I'm writing the essay. So usually do not disturb mode, and I'm cranking out the top part of the newsletter. And then from 4 to 5 is proofing, self-editing, and finding my images and all of that. And then I ship at 5. So that's like what the day looks like. So I try to give myself the morning. So I'm an early riser, but I don't like to start working right away. I think it's important I don't think that it's a good example for me to tell creators to live on their own terms if I start my day accountable to other people. And so I try to be accountable to myself until 10 every day. And then at 10 a.m., I'm available to the rest of the world. And so from 10 to 12, I'm doing all my reporting, 12 to 2, free time. And then 2 to 4, writing. And then 4 to 5 is getting it ready to ship, and then I ship. And then I take Fridays are work days for me, but I don't ship a newsletter on Fridays. So I call it a daily newsletter, but it's Monday through Thursday. And then Fridays are days that I'd like take a breath. So if you're wondering, like, Michael, Friday morning is when I usually like, okay, let's look at the week that was and let's get ready for the next week. And I find one last thing, I know we got to go. I find my when I used to ship 5 days a week, my open rates were so low on Friday that it was just like, so I asked readers, I said, would you miss it if I didn't ship on Friday? And I'm like, no. So I'm not jipping anybody. They actually prefer to not hear from me on Fridays. So
yes, I love it. That was amazing. We got a bunch of stuff in the chat around.
Yeah, I'm looking at it. This has been so nice. So I'm very grateful.
This has been one of my favorite conversations, and I just love the ideas you shared and the transparency. And I love how you organize your approach in such a systematic way that I think will really stick with people.
Yeah.
Michael was also generous enough to put together his slides and a few other resources in a link that, let me confirm that I have not lost. Yes, that I have right in front of me. I'm actually going to put this into the Compound Slack so everybody can see it, but I'll drop it in the chat now so people have it. Maybe this goes without saying. Oh, I was going to say, maybe it goes without saying, but Michael, where should people find you? And
you can follow me on Twitter at Bob Michael Jones. The newsletter is www.thesupercreator.com, and my email address is michael@thesupercreator.com. Like I said, I send a newsletter, one newsletter a week. I don't do any public promotions, but there is, if you're interested in following my work and subscribing to it, there is a special treat for you guys. All of that's in there, and yeah.
Fantastic. God, this was just a total joy, and I learned so much. I don't know how many pages of notes I have, but it's more than 5.
I appreciate it.
Cool. I will get the recording ready, and I'll share it with everyone, not only who made the call, but who registered, and with the Compound community broadly. And
sounds good.
Michael, can't thank you enough for making the time.
Sounds good. I look forward to staying in touch, you guys.
Awesome.
Thanks,
I'm trying to get Michael to join Compound, so we'll get him someday.
Maybe seeing me soon. Take care, everyone.
I hope. See you, man.
Bye.
Thanks.